Do Russian bathrooms have air fresheners? Yes, if the bushes happen to be in bloom. Do they have sinks? Yes, if you wash your hands in the snow. These jokes, though exaggerated, illustrate a fascinating phenomenon that we'll discuss today. Remember when the media in Europe were talking about inflation skyrocketing to nearly 10% per year? In Russia, food prices can change by 10% overnight. Have you recently visited a park in Europe to relax after work? Did you see piles of trash or packs of wild dogs hunting people? No? Well, in Russia, that's an everyday reality. The level of street pollution has become dramatic, especially in the past 2 years, ever since foreign workers stopped coming. This may sound absurd, but can you imagine fighting rats the size of cats for food in Europe? In Russia, that's exactly what happens. In Moscow and St. Petersburg, people battle enormous rats that steal their winter food supplies. They are so big and smart that they can jump over a meter high, and poison or traps don't work on them. Do you remember when half of Europe criticized a politician for promising not to raise taxes, only to later raise them anyway? In Russia, television lies too, but on a much grander scale. Here's an example. Have you heard about the Russian oil tanker disaster in the Black Sea, causing a massive oil spill? Probably. But did you know that Russian media are encouraging people to eat the contaminated fish? Even worse, the Russian government funded a vacation trip for disabled children to the very beaches affected by the spill, because it was cheap. Can you grasp the scale of this absurdity? If you want to hear more shocking facts, stay with me for a moment. Life in Russia, a reality check in Europe. We sometimes complain about reckless drivers, but let's be honest, those are isolated cases, and our roads are generally safe. In Russia, driving is complete chaos. Breaking traffic laws and road rage fights happen daily. And let's not even talk about the safety standards of Russian cars, because, frankly, they don't exist. Finishing school in Europe means you can do whatever you want. In Russia, you are often forcibly drafted into the military. Pursuing dreams and ambitions is a luxury reserved mainly for the children of oligarchs. As one famous meme puts it, Mr. Sasha, dreams are for management. For you, there's the army and cockroaches. And if you're looking for adventure, enjoy your vacation in Ukraine. Russia versus Europe, a stark contrast. Imagine walking through a Russian city. The air is heavy, the buildings are overwhelming, and people seem less cheerful. In Europe, despite our complaints, we still have a certain standard of living that allows us to function comfortably. In Russia, everyday life is a completely different story. In Europe, even a minimum wage worker can afford to shop in a supermarket and buy fruits, vegetables, and meat at reasonable prices. In Russia, these products are often a luxury. Meat prices can be absurdly high, and dairy and vegetables are out of reach for many families. As a result, the average Russian diet is far poorer than that of the average European. Freedom of speech? Forget it. In Europe, we can criticize the government, post negative comments online, or participate in protests. In Russia? Criticizing the authorities can land you in prison, or worse. Take Alexei Navalny, for example, one of the most well-known opposition figures, who was repeatedly arrested and poisoned. Journalists who try to report the truth either disappear under mysterious circumstances or end up in jail. Infrastructure and transport, two opposing worlds traveling across Europe isn't perfect, but we have highways, express roads, and a well-developed railway system. In Russia, getting from one city to another often means enduring hours-long journeys in conditions reminiscent of the 1990s. Many roads are in terrible shape, and public transport is unreliable, if it even exists. Some remote towns have no land routes at all, the only way in or out is by plane. Moscow and St. Petersburg are exceptions, with efficient metro systems and relatively well-maintained streets. But outside of these cities, things get drastically worse. In small towns, your only option might be a battered old bus that runs just a few times a day. Healthcare, better not get sick in Russia. Europeans often complain about long waiting times for doctors and issues with public health care, but compared to Russia, we are in a much better situation. There, if you don't have money or connections, access to medical care is nearly impossible. The public healthcare system is chronically underfunded, while private healthcare is outrageously expensive. Many Russian hospitals look like they belong in a different era, crumbling buildings, outdated equipment, and doctors who barely make ends meet. In Europe, the system may not be perfect, but at least everyone has access to basic healthcare. Living conditions, cramped versus comfortable housing prices in Europe are rising. but the standard of living is incomparably better than in Russia. The average Russian lives in a Khrushchevka, a Soviet-era apartment block with a tiny kitchen and paper-thin walls, where you can hear everything your neighbor does. Many Russians live in kommunalkas, shared apartments where multiple families each have one room, while the kitchen and bathroom are communal. Privacy? Forget it. In Europe, it's standard to have your own studio or apartment. Even when renting, you usually get a place to yourself. On top of that, getting a mortgage in Russia is extremely difficult, and property prices in Moscow and St. Petersburg are insane. As a result, many young people live with their parents well into their 40s, not because they want to, but because they have no other choice. Banking and payments, Europe in the 21st century, Russia left behind in Europe. We take for granted the convenience of contactless payments, instant transfers, and digital banking. In Russia? A completely different reality. After sanctions were imposed, Visa and MasterCard stopped working, meaning Russians can only use their cards within the country. International money transfers are nearly impossible, and the ruble is so unstable that saving in it is like storing money in a leaky bag. Life in Russia, stagnation, not progress. Europe, despite its challenges, is a place where people can follow their passions, start businesses, travel, and enjoy life. In Russia, there's a feeling of stagnation. Startups? In Europe, they pop up everywhere. In Russia, unless you're connected to the government, your business can be confiscated under the excuse of foreign influence. Travel? In Europe, a weekend trip to Prague, Berlin, or Budapest is normal. In Russia, due to sanctions and travel restrictions, leaving the country is a luxury few can afford. Nightlife? In Europe, bars and clubs are full of life. In Russia, outside Moscow and St. Petersburg, most cities shut down by 10 p.m. A final thought: despite being close neighbors, Europe and Russia have taken completely different paths. The differences we see today are the result of these separate histories. If you ever feel like complaining about Europe, just remember, it could have been much worse. You could have been born in Russia.